What's up, my friends? Welcome to my kitchen. One of the most challenging things about good sourdough bread is timing and working out the schedule, especially if you're a busy person, if you work during the day. Figuring out how to do that, especially on the weekdays, can be quite a challenge. This video is all about the schedule that I created for myself that allows me to create warm, fresh sourdough bread for my family throughout the week. I've also created a document outlining every detail of this schedule, and it's linked in the description below. So go ahead and grab that schedule and you can modify it and use it however it works for you. So let's dive in. Okay, so it's day number one. It's early in the morning, and it's that time between me getting home from the gym and the kids are just starting to get up and get ready for school. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to feed my starter because I want to get that starter active. So whether or not you're starting or activating your starter from something in the fridge like this, or you have a countertop starter. I have a countertop starter because I cook sourdough 3 or 4 times a week. So I'm just gonna use my countertop starter, but just know if you're pulling it from the fridge, it's the exact same thing. And I like to do a combination of a white, unbleached, all-purpose flour and this Bob's Red Mill dark rye flour. I also do equal parts flour to equal parts water when I feed my starter. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do 35 grams of flour. So a couple of scoops of this. Take it to 30. I know that's a little less than 80-20, but no problem. All right, now I'm just gonna add 35 grams of water. I always use bottled water, purified bottled water. It's just a little bit more pure. We're not getting some of the possibility of fluorides or whatever from the tap water. The consistency of the starter, you want it like a thick pancake or a waffle batter. I use a washable chopstick to do all of my stirring. I'll show you a close-up of this so you can see the consistency. Screw the lid on really tight. So that's it for the morning of day one. Really easy, just a couple of minutes. All right, so it's about 6 p.m. Just got done with work, getting back into the kitchen. So remember this morning we fed our sourdough starter so it got nice and active. It starts eating those proteins, bubbling up. It probably grew and shrank in the time that you were at work. So what we want to do very first thing as soon as we get started this evening is we want to feed our starter again. All right, so here's my starter. You can see inside the starter, you can see that it's still a little bit active. There's bubbles, it's pretty light, but you can also see the marks on the bottle that it rose about to that point and then it went back down. So that means the starter is starting to go hungry again. There's not a lot for it to eat, so we want to give it some of that food. So in this feeding, I want to make sure that I feed it enough that I'll have enough starter to both go in the bread and have some left over to keep cultivating, keep growing, keep using. So I'm going to feed it 45 grams of white unbleached all-purpose flour, and then I'm going to feed it 5 grams. And there's no exact science to this. I just like using the Bob's Red Mill. It gives it a nice sour flavor. There's not a specific ratio that you have to do. You really can do any combination of flour, but I'm going to feed it 5 grams of the Bob's Red Mill to take it up to 50 grams and feed it 50 grams of water as well. I'm just gonna get my handy dandy chopstick. All right, I'm gonna screw the lid back on just snug, and I'm gonna set this aside. All right, so the next thing that we're gonna do while the starter is getting active is we're gonna start the autolyse process. Simply put, what the autolyse process is we're gonna take the flour and the water only. We're gonna combine those so that the gluten can start to really bond to each other and form. Part of having successful sourdough is knowing when to let the dough sit. If you try to rush these periods of waiting, it's gonna result in bread that's not that fluffy, soft, crispy outside that we absolutely love. For my sourdough bread, I really like to aim for that 80% moisture. So what that means is we're going to initially mix at a 70% moisture, and it's all based off the amount of flour that you use. So the flour is your base, and then you aim for 80% above that. Now the starter is also 100% moisture. So we're going to reduce that in the autolyse process to 70% with water. So let me show you what I mean. This recipe is gonna make 2 decent sized loaves of sourdough bread. So we're gonna start with 700 grams of flour. One of the things I love about starting with 700 grams of flour is that I can take a bottle of water, that is this 16.9 fluid ounces, like a pretty standard bottle of water. And I can use the entire bottle of water. I don't have to really measure it out. 480 grams water to 700 grams flour is gonna give us about that 70% moisture. All right, for the mixing, I like to use just a small rubber spatula. Some people like to get their hands in there and just get it really mixing around. I find that I can do a bit of a cleaner job and actually a better mixing job if I just use a spatula, but you do whatever works best for you. Now you want to just start folding this over. Basically my best method is to just take the water, keep folding it over, and then scraping the sides. As it starts to become more of a ball, I just like to fold it over and push it in. All right, this consistency is looking really good. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna let this rest for about 45 minutes to an hour. This is where you go hang out with your kids, watch a television show. I'm gonna set a timer for 45 minutes. I'm gonna cover it with a wet towel, and we'll see you back here in about an hour. Okay, so while the flour and water mixture's been resting, our starter's also been rising. I wanna show you this. I put a rubber band on it just so you can see how much it's grown just in the last 45, 50 minutes. And it's really active. Let's open this up. I'll just show you close up. It's bubbling, it's moving, it's ready to go into the sourdough mixture. So our next phase, our next step is we'll take this cloth off. We're gonna add the salt and the starter. I like to fold, especially the salt, I like to fold in a little bit by a little bit, otherwise it'll get all clumped in there. So because we started with 700 grams of flour, we're gonna go 2% of 700, which is about 14 grams. So 14 grams of salt, and we're just gonna go, I'm gonna put a little in there on the top, and then it's gonna be a little sticky, no problem. And I'm gonna fold that over. Put a little more salt in. First time I did it this way, I got really concerned because the dough starts to feel like it separates. But by the end of the night, it's all gonna come together and be really cohesive, beautiful dough. All right, so we've got the salt somewhat folded in. I'm gonna divot the dough here, and we're gonna add the starter. So with the starter, we're gonna go 20%. So in this case, it's 140 grams. It's really nice because the salt and the starter really correlate. When we have 2%, it's 14 grams. When you have 20%, it's 140 grams. And it's it doesn't have to be exact. Oh, this is warm because of the active starter. So I'm gonna start to pour and watch my scale here. That's about 140, it's 150, not a big deal. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna start to fold this starter in. This is where it gets a bit messy. I wanna preserve and keep as much starter in there as possible. I'm gonna be scraping the sides of the bowl and folding the dough. This part takes the most time to start getting it consistent and incorporated, but we're just folding. We're not kneading. That's one of the things with sourdough bread that's different from other breads that you probably already know, but we're not kneading this dough. We're just folding it over. We're keeping the air inside the dough. I just keep rotating and folding, rotating and folding. Rotating and folding. Okay, the consistency is starting to feel really good. The starter's starting to work itself into the dough. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna put the wet towel back on it, let it rest for 10 minutes, and then we'll come back for our first stretch and fold phase. All right, so I'm just gonna cover it up here and then set my timer for 10 minutes. All right, so now that that has set for 10 minutes, we're ready for our first stretch and fold phase. We're gonna do 4 stretch and fold phases, separated by 30 minutes of rest time. So take the cloth off here, and we're gonna just sneak our fingers into the side of the dough like this, and we stretch and fold. Turn the bowl, quarter turn, sneak our fingers in there, stretch and fold. As you continue to move around the bowl, you'll notice the dough start to tighten up. That's great. We're strengthening those gluten bonds. We're mixing everything together. Stretch and fold. I'm gonna do one more just for good measure. As you get further along in the process, really only 4 stretch and folds is all you need. So I'm gonna fold that over. We're gonna cover it up again. I'm gonna set my timer for 30 minutes, and we'll be back to do our next stretch and fold. All right, now we're ready for round 2 of stretch and fold. We'll pull the cloth off, same thing. And then we're gonna cover it back up, and I'll see you in 30 minutes. All right, so this is round 3 of the stretch and fold. Cover it up. We'll see you in 30 minutes for round 4. All right, now we're ready for our 4th and final round of stretch and fold. I just wanted you to take a look at, see these bubbles that are forming inside of the dough. It looks super consistent. It smells delicious. All right, last stretch and fold. All right, so it's 9 p.m. at night. It's getting late. It's time to put this away for the night. So we're gonna do the bulk raise now, or the bulk proof. And we're gonna do it in the fridge overnight. So I'm just gonna take some plastic wrap and I'm gonna cover the bowl. And then we're gonna put it in the fridge overnight. Having it in the fridge overnight increases the flavor profile of the dough. It allows it to slow that rising process down just a little bit. And in the morning, it's gonna be ready for us to shape. So let's put it to bed. Good night, little dough. All right, so it's 6:13 a.m. on day 2. Overnight, our dough has been rising in the fridge. We're gonna get it out of the fridge now, and we're gonna pre-shape our loaves. So let's get to work. Okay, so the first thing that we're gonna do is we're just gonna spread a little bit of flour on the working surface on the countertop that we're gonna use to shape the loaves. Now, we really don't wanna use very much flour at all, as little as possible, just to keep, obviously we wanna keep it from sticking, but we really don't want to mess with the level of moisture that we've put into our dough. And using too much flour in these shaping phases can really mess with that moisture level. Look at that. Oh my gosh, that looks so good. All right, so next is we're going to just gently remove the dough from the bowl. We just kind of wedge our fingers down in there, like so. All right, next we're gonna take our bench scraper. You could also use a knife or a really sturdy pancake flipper, but we're just gonna split this dough in half. We're starting to shape our 2 loaves now, so we wanna try to find some sort of semblance of equality between the 2 pieces of dough, but I don't worry too much about making sure that they're really equal. Each loaf comes out with its own personality, and I don't mind if one's just a little bit smaller than the other. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna pre-shape our loaves. Now remember, this is just the pre-shape. This is just for us to start getting towards some semblance of a loaf shape, and 2, we're just adding more stretch and air to our loaves of bread. So I'm just gently taking the dough and stretching it. So what I'm gonna do now is just what I call a pinch and fold. So we'll just grab one side, pinch it, fold it in, do it to the other side, on down the line. Down to the end. Once we get to the end, I just roll it up like a sleeping bag. Remember, it doesn't have to look pretty. This is our pre-shape. All right, so these are gonna rest for about a half hour. I'm just gonna put a little more flour on the top of them, not a lot, because we're gonna cover it with plastic and let them bench rest for 30 minutes. After 30 minutes, we're gonna come back and get a final shape on these guys. All right, so while these pre-shaped loaves are bench resting, I'm gonna get our Banneton baskets ready. I think they're really helpful both in the proving process, but then also in getting them into the oven. But we do wanna make sure that they're well floured before we put the dough in them. So basically what I do is I get my little strainer here, and I just start lining the entire basket with flour. Don't worry, you can put a good amount of flour in there. We'll brush the flour off before we bake it. I'll get on the sides. Another thing that I really love to do is to use the everything but the bagel seasoning from Trader Joe's. And I usually just do it on one of the loaves because I like a plain loaf and then I like a seasoned loaf. And I just take this seasoning and I just dump some down into the bottom of the basket. And then I'll take a plate and just spread a little bit all over the plate. All right, now that those have bench rest for a half hour, we're gonna take the cover off. we're gonna get a final shape on these loaves and get them into the basket. So I'm gonna take just a little bit more flour, not much. Remember, we don't wanna add a ton. I'm gonna add just a little bit to the bench. This is just so as we do the final shaping, we don't get any sticking, but we do want a little bit of sticking. We want to be able to create tension on the surface of this loaf, and I'll show you what I mean. So I'm just going to take this loaf and I'm going to stretch it again. And then we're going to do the same motion, the pinch and fold on down the line. So pinch, fold, pinch, fold, pinch, fold, pinch, fold, pinch, fold, pinch, fold, roll it up. And here's where we really want to create some surface tension. So I'm going to fold it over on itself. And we're going to start to work that dough up underneath. If you want, you can take your bench scraper, start to shape it. Admittedly, I'm not the best loaf shaper. I don't really care if my loaves look messy. I like them to have a little bit of character. So this is the loaf that I'm going to season with everything but the bagel. So we want to use our seasoned basket and our plate. I'm going to take the loaf and I'm just going to roll it in the seasoning and then lift it and drop it into the basket. Now I want to flour the edges of the dough just a little bit, just so we don't get any sticking. So I'm just going to take a freezer bag here and slide the loaf in, and then we're going to put this in the fridge while we're at work. All right, so we're getting near to the end of the process. Pretty soon we're going to have freshly baked bread. It is the end of day 2. The bread's been sitting and rising in their baskets in the fridge the whole day while we've been at work. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to take those out of the fridge and get them starting to come back to room temperature. So you can keep them covered on the counter. I'm just going to pull them out here so you can see them. And we've got a little bit of a rise out of them. Some people talk about them doubling in size or that sort of thing. Don't worry about that at all. What we can do to check for a good rise is the spring test. That's just by pushing our finger into the bread. If it springs back mostly, but still leaves a little indent, we're still good. The next thing I'm gonna do while these are starting to come up to room temperature is I'm gonna turn the oven on. So we're gonna get the oven heated up. Right now I already have the Dutch oven sitting in the oven. I'm gonna open that up and I'm gonna take the lid off of it and just put it to the side so I can make sure that the space inside the oven gets preheated along with the whole oven itself. Close it up and we're gonna hit 500 degrees. So I have a couple of tools that I use to prepare the bread to go into the oven. I have these silicone mats that work really, really well. And they have these longer handles so that I can actually lower it down into the Dutch oven and pick it up out of the Dutch oven. I also have my lame or my lom, however you say it. This is just a nice little razor blade here so I can score the bread. And then I use a rubber brush to get some of the excess flour off. So I just take the rubber mats or the silicone mats, put them on top of the basket like this, and then flip it upside down. I've done a lot of loaves without baskets, but once you have baskets, you realize how easy it is to get the bread out of there. Whenever I'm dealing with bowls and cloths and all that sort of stuff, they seem to not keep their shape very well. As you look at the shape of the loaf, as it starts to turn that corner, that's where I like to score it. So I start a little bit lower, and I want to get a good, nice score on it. So that's where all the expansion will happen in the loaf. And then I like to do just some decorative, maybe leaf plant looking scores. Also want to brush all of the excess flour. There's not a lot of excess flour on this one, but I do want to brush it off of the loaf and the mat because the flour will burn. So now this is ready to go in the oven. All I have to do is just pick it up, drop it into the Dutch oven, and we'll set our timer. We want to place the lid. We're gonna set our bake time for about 22 minutes. This is my favorite part of the bread making process. In just a second, we're gonna open up the oven. We're gonna see that oven pop. We're gonna take off the lid. It already smells delicious. I can't wait to see what it looks like. Let's take a look. Oh, look at that. Look at that oven pop. We got that ridge up the middle of the loaf. And then we're gonna put this back in. So the second portion, the uncovered bake, we're going to bake it at, we're gonna reduce our temperature to 450. And we're gonna bake it for 16 minutes, checking it regularly for the right coloration and seeing if it's done before that. So let's take this out and have a look. So take a look at that. The coloring is just perfect. It did break just a little bit, expanded just a little bit here on my decorative scoring, but on this side, the decorative scoring looks really, really good. Crunch to the crust. Oh baby, we got that nice hollow sound to it. I can't wait to cut into these. I'm gonna let that sit for about a half hour and then we're gonna cut into them and see how they look. Let's cut it open. Look at that, soft, nice and airy. Lots of space inside the loaf. Take a look at this. Absolutely delicious. All right, my friends, hopefully this video has been really helpful for you. Remember, I outlined every detail of this schedule. You can grab that at the link below. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.